The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched high above the assembled delegates, its crystal dome showing the endless stars beyond. Ambassador Zeth Kree, of the Hegemony Coalition, stood at the speaking platform, his blue skin gleaming under the bright lights. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke to the gathered representatives of 100 different worlds. Fellow council members, Zeth Kree announced, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. The Korthak Empire has pushed too far. They have taken 3 of our border systems and killed thousands of our people. We need help to stop them before they take more. Murmurs filled the hall as delegates whispered among themselves. Wars between the Hegemony and the Korthaks were nothing new. They had been fighting over border territories for almost 200 years. Most council members saw it as just another dispute between old enemies. Elder Vashti slowly stood up from her seat near the front. She was ancient even by her species' long standards, her gray skin marked with the deep lines of age. Her voice was quiet, but somehow everyone could hear her clearly. "I remember the old warnings," she said, her words making the hall fall silent. "In the archives, there are records marked with red symbols. Records about the humans." Zeth Kree's face showed his annoyance. "Elder Vashti, with respect, those are just old stories. Tales meant to frighten children." "Are they?" Vashti asked. She walked slowly to the center of the hall, her walking stick tapping against the smooth floor. "The records say clearly, never involve the Terrans in warfare. They do not fight to win battles. They fight to end wars permanently." Many delegates had never heard these stories. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 200 years ago, and they kept mostly to themselves. They traded peacefully, shared some technology, and rarely spoke in council meetings. Most species found them quiet and unremarkable. "What could that possibly mean?" asked Council Speaker Norvac, his tentacles curling with confusion. "All species fight to win when they go to war." Vashti shook her head slowly. "Not the humans. The first diplomatic team that made contact with them found their homeworld covered in the ruins of old wars. When they asked the humans about it, they said something strange. They said they had learned that the only way to win a war was to make sure it never happened again." Zeth Kree made a dismissive sound. "Pretty words. But we need military help now. Not philosophy. The humans have ships and weapons. That's what matters." "The records say more," Vashti continued. "During first contact, the human ambassador was asked what their species would do if another species made war against them. The human smiled and said, 'We would fix the problem.' When asked what that meant, the human said, 'We would fix the problem that made them think war was necessary.'" The hall was completely quiet now. Even the usual background hum of the translation system seemed muted. "Elder," said Zeth Kree, "these old warnings mean nothing. We're not asking the humans to fight against us. We're asking them to help us fight against the Korthaks. They should be happy to help protect peaceful worlds from aggression." A new voice spoke from the back of the hall. It was calm and soft, but it carried easily to every corner of the great chamber. "We are always willing to help." Everyone turned to look. Ambassador Chen of the Human Alliance walked slowly down the center aisle. She was small compared to most of the other species. With dark hair and wearing a simple black uniform, she looked completely ordinary, but somehow her presence made the huge hall feel smaller. "Ambassador Chen," said Council Speaker Norvac, "we did not know you were attending today's session." "We monitor all council proceedings," Chen replied simply. "We heard Ambassador Zeth Kree's request for assistance." She reached the center of the hall and stood near Elder Vashti. "We are prepared to provide military support if that is what the council decides." Zeth Kree's face lit up with triumph. "Excellent. How many ships can you send? What weapons do you bring?" Chen tilted her head slightly, studying Zeth Kree with dark eyes. "Before we proceed, I must ask one question. Are you certain this is the path you wish to take?" "Of course," Zeth Kree said quickly. "The Korthaks must be stopped. War is the only language they understand." "I see." Chen was quiet for a long moment. Around the hall, delegates waited to hear what she would say next. Finally, she spoke again. "Very well. We will send a fleet to assist you. Elder Vashti reached out with one wrinkled hand and gently touched Chen's arm. "Child," she said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Chen looked at the old delegate with what might have been sadness in her eyes. "Elder Vashti, when someone asks for our help to stop a war, we cannot refuse. But we will do it our way." "What does that mean?" asked Zethkri. "It means," said Chen, "that when we are finished, this war will be over." 3 weeks later, the human fleet arrived at the edge of hegemony space. Zethkri had expected hundreds of ships, maybe thousands like the great fleets that the hegemony and Korthax used in their battles. Instead, only 50 human vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The ships were strange-looking. Instead of the heavy armor and massive weapons that covered most warships, the human vessels had unusual arrays of equipment that the hegemony scanners couldn't identify. There were sensor dishes, communication arrays, and what looked like construction equipment. Admiral Korthva, of the hegemony fleet, contacted the human ships immediately. "Human vessels, we are ready to move against the Korthak positions. How do you want to coordinate our attack?" The reply came from Admiral Jackson, the human fleet commander. His voice was calm and professional. "Admiral Korthva, we won't be coordinating any attacks just yet. We need to gather some information first." "Information? About what?" "About everything," Jackson replied. "We'll be ready to begin operations in about 2 weeks. Until then, please continue your normal patrol patterns." Korthva was confused but agreed. He watched as the human ships spread out across the border region, not to attack or defend, but apparently just to observe. Some of them even moved into neutral space between the two empires. It made no sense to him. How could you fight a war without fighting? 2 weeks later, he would begin to understand why the old warnings existed. Admiral Korthva stood on the bridge of his command ship, staring at the display screen with growing frustration. For 2 weeks, the human ships had been moving through both hegemony and Korthak space like they were on some kind of sightseeing tour. They hadn't fired a single shot. They hadn't even raised their shields when Korthak fighters approached them. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "the human ship, Determination, is requesting permission to send teams to our mining stations in the Kepler system." "Mining stations?" Korthva's head tentacles twisted with confusion. "Why would they want to visit mining stations?" "They say they need to understand our supply chains and resource distribution networks." Korthva had been fighting wars for 30 years, and he had never heard anything like this. Supply chains? What did that have to do with defeating the Korthax? He opened a channel to Admiral Jackson's flagship. "Admiral Jackson, with respect, when are we going to start fighting? My scouts report that the Korthax are building up forces in the Gamma sector. We should hit them before they're ready." Jackson's calm voice came back through the speakers. "Admiral Korthva, we appreciate your tactical knowledge, but we need more time to complete our preparations." "What preparations? Your ships aren't even in combat formation." "We're gathering intelligence. War isn't about destroying your enemy's ships, Admiral. It's about understanding why they fight." Korthva ended the call and turned to his staff officers. None of them understood what the humans were doing either. But they were allies now, so they had to trust that the humans knew what they were talking about. On the other side of the border, Captain Sarah Martinez walked through the corridors of the research vessel Discovery. Her ship was one of 12 human vessels that had been operating in the disputed border region for 2 weeks now. But instead of weapons officers and fighter pilots, her crew included anthropologists, linguists, economists, and social scientists. "Report," she said as she entered the main research lab. "Doctor." Emily Watson looked up from her data screens. "Captain, we've completed our analysis of both the hegemony and Korthak communication networks. We've mapped their government structures, identified key decision-makers, and tracked their resource flows. What about the psychological profiles?" Dr. Chen has finished his analysis of both cultures. "The results are interesting." Dr. Watson pulled up a holographic display, showing complex charts and graphs. "Both species are naturally territorial, but not unusually aggressive. The current conflict isn't about ancient hatred or incompatible natures. Then what's it about? Money. And very specifically, control of the rare mineral deposits in the border systems. Captain Martinez nodded. This matched what the other research teams had found. Who's profiting from the continued conflict? We've identified 17 major arms dealers who sell weapons to both sides, 43 shipping companies that overcharge for military supplies, and 12 financial institutions that loan money for military spending to both governments. And how long has this been going on? The border conflict officially started over resource rights, but our analysis shows that peaceful mining agreements could have been reached easily. Someone has been working very hard to prevent any diplomatic solutions. Captain Martinez smiled grimly. Time to make some new friends. 3 days later, Commander Zethkrai received a call that made his blood run cold. His aide rushed into his office with panic written across his blue face. Sir, we have a problem. A big problem. What now? Zethkrai asked. The humans. They're talking to the Korthaks. What do you mean talking to them? Are they switching sides? No, sir. They're not switching sides. They're talking to individual Korthak soldiers. By name. Zethkrai felt his foreheart skip a beat. Show me. The aide activated a holographic display that showed a recording from yesterday's patrol. A single human ship was surrounded by 6 Korthak fighters. Instead of shooting or running, the human ship opened a communication channel. The human voice was calm and spoke perfect Korthak dialect. Fighter pilot Groktha of the 3rd Squadron. Designation K-47. From the mining colony of Vektar. Your sister Mira just had her second clutch of eggs 3 days ago. Congratulations. In the recording, the Korthak pilot's voice was filled with shock. How? How do you know about my sister? We know about all of you, the human replied. We know you joined the military because the mining jobs on Vektar don't pay enough to support a family. We know you send half your military pay home to your mother. We know you've been in 17 battles and have never actually shot down an enemy ship because you aimed to miss. The Korthak fighter group had stopped attacking. They just hung in space, listening to the human ship talk to each pilot individually, mentioning personal details that should have been impossible to know. Fighter pilot Nekvar. Your daughter is studying medicine on the home world. She wants to be a doctor to help people, not hurt them. You told her you were proud of her for choosing to heal instead of fight. How do you know these things? Pilot Nekvar asked, his voice shaking. Because we asked, the human said simply. We talked to your families. We listened to your public communications. We read your social media posts and your letters home. We know that none of you actually want to be fighting this war. The recording ended with all 6 Korthak fighters flying away without firing a shot. Zethkrai stared at the display in horror. How is this possible? How do they know so much about individual enemy soldiers? But, sir, his aide said quietly, that's not the worst part. We've checked our own databases. They know just as much about our people. They know everything about everyone. At that same moment, on the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Jackson was reviewing reports from all 50 ships in his fleet. Each vessel had been conducting similar operations for the past 3 weeks. They weren't gathering military intelligence in any traditional sense. They were mapping the entire social, economic, and political structure of both civilizations. Admiral, reported Commander Lisa Park. We've identified all major government officials, military commanders, business leaders, and influential citizens in both empires. We have complete profiles on their motivations, personal relationships, and individual psychological patterns. What about the civilian populations? Dr. Rodriguez has completed his analysis. Both populations are tired of the war but feel trapped by their governments. Most citizens on both sides would support peace if they believed it was possible. And the real power brokers? We've identified the groups that actually profit from this conflict. Most of them operate behind the scenes and have been deliberately preventing peaceful solutions for decades. Admiral Jackson nodded slowly. Time to move to Phase 2. Begin broadcasting. Broadcasting what, sir? Jackson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. The truth. All of it. Within hours, every communication device in both empires began receiving data transmissions from the human fleet. But it wasn't military propaganda or demands for surrender. It was financial records, government documents, recorded conversations, and detailed evidence of exactly who was making money from the war and how they were doing it. The humans had turned their careful research into the most powerful weapon in the galaxy: absolute transparency. The war was about to change in ways that no one had ever imagined. The protests started on Hegemony Prime at exactly 0800 local time. By 0900, similar demonstrations had begun on 17 other Hegemony worlds. By noon, the Korthak Empire was dealing with riots on 23 of their major planets. Commander Zethkri watched the reports flooding in with growing panic. His communication screens showed angry crowds gathering outside government buildings across both empires. The protesters weren't chanting war songs or demanding victory. They were holding up data tablets, showing financial records, and shouting about corruption. "Sir," his aide reported, "the humans are broadcasting continuously on all civilian channels. They're showing government tax records, military spending reports, and private communications from the past 10 years. "What kind of communications?" Zethkri asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "Everything, sir. Private messages between military contractors discussing how to extend the war to increase profits. Secret meetings between government officials planning to create artificial resource shortages. Personal bank records showing who's been getting rich while soldiers die." Zethkri's blue skin turned a sickly pale color. "Are they showing our communications too?" The aide nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Including the conversation where you told Minister Vekthar that a quick peace would be bad for the defense budget." On Korthak Prime, similar scenes were playing out. General Mordak of the Korthak military watched in horror as his own people turned against him. The humans hadn't just hacked their communication systems. They had apparently been recording and analyzing everything for weeks. The broadcast currently playing on every screen in the Empire showed a conversation between Mordak and 3 civilian contractors. In the recording, they were laughing about how the simple border dispute had lasted almost 200 years and made them all wealthy beyond their dreams. "The beautiful thing," recording Mordak was saying, "is that we never have to actually win. We just have to keep fighting long enough for the next shipment of weapons to arrive." The real Mordak tried to contact his troops, but found that his soldiers were watching the same broadcasts. Many of them were seeing for the first time how much money their commanders were making while sending them into battles that could have been avoided. On the human flagship, Admiral Jackson watched the reports with satisfaction. Dr. Watson stood beside him, monitoring the psychological impact across both empires. "Admiral," she reported, "civil unrest is spreading faster than we projected. Both governments are losing control of their civilian populations." "What about military units?" "Mixed results. Many soldiers are refusing orders, but some elite units are still loyal to their commands. We should expect some military resistance. And the targeted individuals?" Dr. Watson smiled. "The war profiteers are panicking. Several arms dealers have already fled to neutral space. 3 major shipping companies have suspended operations. The financial institutions are frantically trying to destroy records." Admiral Jackson nodded. "Time for Phase 3. Begin direct communication with civilian leadership." What happened next had never been seen before in galactic history. Instead of demanding surrender from the military commanders, the humans began contacting mayors, local governors, business leaders, and community organizers across both empires. They offered something that no one had expected: solutions. Dr. Emily Chen, the fleet's chief anthropologist, led the communication effort. Her teams had spent weeks studying both cultures and understanding their actual needs. Now they began broadcasting detailed proposals for ending the resource conflict that had started the war. "Citizens of both empires," her message began, "your governments have told you that war is necessary because there aren't enough rare minerals to meet everyone's needs. This is not true." The broadcast included detailed geological surveys that the humans had conducted using their advanced sensors. The disputed border regions contained enough rare minerals to supply both empires for centuries. More importantly, the humans had identified 17 other star systems with similar resources that no one was claiming. "The shortage is artificial," Dr. Chen continued. It exists only because certain individuals profit from scarcity. We are prepared to share the technology and knowledge needed to end this shortage permanently. But the humans didn't stop with resource solutions. They began broadcasting detailed peace proposals that addressed every major issue that had kept the war going. Trade agreements that would benefit both empires. Shared mining operations that would provide jobs for unemployed workers. Exchange programs that would help the two species understand each other better. For the first time in 200 years, ordinary citizens in both empires could see what peace might actually look like. The reaction from the war profiteers was immediate and desperate. Several arms dealers attempted to coordinate with hardline military commanders to launch direct attacks on the human fleet. They discovered that their communications were being monitored and their plans were being broadcast to their own soldiers in real time. Commander Zethkree found himself in the impossible position of trying to plan military operations while knowing that the enemy was listening to every word he said. When he tried to use secure military channels, he found that the humans had cracked those too. When he tried face-to-face meetings, recordings of those conversations appeared on public broadcasts within hours. How are they doing this? He demanded of his intelligence officers. How do they know everything? Sir, one of his analysts replied nervously. We've been studying their ships. They're not using any technology we recognize. Their communication systems seem to operate faster than light in ways that shouldn't be possible, and their information processing capabilities are beyond anything in our databases. What are you saying? I'm saying, sir, that they're so far ahead of us technologically that we might as well be throwing rocks at starships. That's when Zethkree realized the full scope of what they were facing. The humans hadn't just prepared for war. They had developed technology specifically designed to make traditional warfare impossible. They could monitor everything, communicate instantaneously across galactic distances, and process information faster than entire governments could react. But the most terrifying part was what they were doing with these capabilities. Instead of using them to destroy their enemies, they were using them to make everyone understand exactly why the enemies existed in the first place. The breaking point came when the humans released their complete analysis of the war's history. The broadcast lasted for 6 hours and covered 200 years of conflict in detail. It showed how every peace negotiation had failed, who had sabotaged each attempt at diplomatic solution, and exactly how much money various individuals had made from keeping the war going. By the end of the broadcast, both empires understood that they hadn't been fighting each other. They had been fighting for the profit margins of a small group of war profiteers who had been manipulating both sides for generations. The revolution that followed wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. When everyone knows the truth, lies become impossible to maintain. General Mordak tried to rally his remaining loyal troops for one final attack against the human fleet. He discovered that his soldiers had voted to arrest him instead. Similar scenes played out across both empires, as military units chose to follow orders from their home governments, rather than the commanders who had been sending them to die for money. Admiral Jackson received surrender offers from both empires on the same day. He politely declined both offers. "We're not here to accept your surrender," he told the stunned ambassadors. "We're here to help you build something better." The humans had won the war without fighting it. Now they were about to do something even more remarkable. They were going to make sure it never happened again. Emergency session alarms echoed through the corridors of both the Hegemony High Command and the Korthak War Council. For the first time in 2 centuries, desperate messages were passing between the two empires' leadership. Not battle plans or threats, but panicked requests for cooperation against an enemy that neither side understood. "They're not fighting a war," General Mordak told the Emergency Council meeting on Korthak Prime. "They're performing surgery on our entire civilization." Commander Zethkree's holographic image flickered in the center of the Korthak Council chamber. Despite being longtime enemies, both leaders found themselves working together for survival. "Our intelligence networks are completely compromised," he reported. "Every secure channel, every secret meeting, every private conversation, they know about all of it before we do." "How is that possible?" demanded Council Leader Vextar. "We've changed our encryption methods 17 times in the past week." "It doesn't matter," Zethkree replied grimly. "They're not breaking our codes. They're predicting what we're going to say before we say it." This was the terrifying truth that both empires were beginning to understand. The human fleet wasn't just monitoring their communications. Through some combination of advanced technology and impossible analytical capability, they seemed to know what every major leader would do in any given situation. 3 days earlier, Mordak had planned a secret strike against the human research vessel Discovery. He had shared the plan with only 2 trusted advisors in a private, encrypted meeting. Before his ships could even launch, every soldier in the attack squadron had received detailed messages explaining why the mission was doomed and offering alternative career opportunities in the post-war reconstruction effort. Half of his pilots had defected before the mission began. "We need to try something they can't predict," insisted Admiral Kekvar of the Korthak fleet. "Something completely random." "Aw, like what?" asked Mordak. "A joint operation. Combine our fleets and hit them with everything we have. They can't have predicted that we would work together." On the human flagship, Admiral Jackson listened to this conversation in real time through the communication intercept systems. He turned to Dr. Watson with a slight smile. "Dr. Watson, would you like to make the call? Or shall I?" Dr. Watson checked her data screen. "According to our behavioral analysis, they'll propose the joint fleet action in approximately." Now, as if on cue, encrypted messages began flowing between the 2 empires' military commands. Within an hour, they had agreed to combine their remaining forces for a desperate final assault on the human fleet. "Impressive," said Admiral Jackson. "Right on schedule." "It's not really prediction, Doctor," Watson explained to the bridge crew. "It's just logical analysis. When you understand how someone thinks, how their culture shapes their decisions, and what options they believe they have, their choices become fairly obvious." "So what do we do now?" asked Commander Park. "Now we help them understand what their real options are." The joint hegemony Korthak fleet assembled in neutral space between the 2 empires. It was an impressive sight, over 3,000 warships from both sides working together for the first time in 2 centuries. Their combined firepower could have devastated entire star systems. Admiral Korthva of the hegemony stood on his bridge next to General Mordak, who had come aboard for the operation. Both commanders felt confident that no force in the galaxy could stand against their united armada. "All ships report ready," announced the communications officer. "Target the human flagship," ordered Korthva. "Maximum firepower." What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come. Instead of raising shields or maneuvering to avoid the attack, the 50 human ships simply broadcast a message on all frequencies. The voice was Admiral Jackson. Calm and professional as always. "Attention, combined fleet. Before you fire, there are some things you should know." Holographic displays activated on every ship in the massive fleet. The images showed detailed technical schematics of their own vessels, including structural weak points, shield harmonics, and weapon system vulnerabilities. "These are the complete technical specifications for all of your ships," Jackson continued. "Please note the highlighted areas showing critical system failures that will occur if you fire your weapons in your current formation." The fleet commanders stared in shock at the displays. The humans had somehow analyzed every ship in their combined forces and identified fatal design flaws that even the ship's own engineers hadn't noticed. "Admiral Korthva," the voice continued, "your flagship's main reactor will overload if you fire your primary weapons while your shields are polarized in their current configuration. You have approximately 30 seconds to adjust your power settings or evacuate your engineering section." Warning alarms immediately started sounding on Korthva's bridge. "General Mordak, your command ship's hull will suffer catastrophic decompression if you fire your missiles from their current positions. The launch vibrations will cause a resonance cascade failure in the weakened hull sections from your last battle." More alarms began sounding throughout the fleet as ship's computers confirmed the human analysis. "But most importantly," Jackson's voice continued, "before you decide whether to attack us, you should know what happened to your homeworlds while you were gathering this fleet." The displays changed to show live feeds from cities across both empires. But instead of the panic and chaos that the military leaders expected, they saw peaceful crowds celebrating in the streets. Government buildings were flying new flags, flags that showed symbols of both empires combined together. "Your people have voted," Jackson announced. While you were planning military operations, every civilian government in both empires held emergency elections. The results were overwhelming. Over 90% of citizens voted to establish a unified government and end the war immediately. Mordak's voice was barely a whisper. "That's impossible. We didn't authorize any elections." "You didn't need to," replied Jackson. Emergency powers provisions in both empires' constitutions allow civilian governments to hold immediate elections during times of military coup attempts. When your military forces abandoned their homeworlds to come here, the civilian leadership declared that a coup was in progress. The truth hit both commanders like a physical blow. By gathering their forces for this attack, they had accidentally triggered legal procedures that allowed their own people to vote them out of power. "The new unified government has already sent us formal surrender documents," Jackson continued. "But as I told your previous ambassadors, we're not interested in accepting surrender. We're here to help build something better." "What do you want from us?" Korthva asked, his voice defeated. "We want you to go home. Help your people build their new government. Use your military expertise to organize disaster relief and infrastructure reconstruction instead of destruction. Become the heroes your people need for peace instead of war." The massive combined fleet hung in space, thousands of ships suddenly without purpose or enemy. "And if we refuse?" Mordak asked. "Then you'll be arrested by your own people when you return home," Jackson replied matter-of-factly. "The new government has already issued warrants for war crimes committed by military leaders who prolonged the conflict for personal profit. But they've also offered full pardons for anyone willing to help with peaceful reconstruction." Dr. Watson monitored the psychological profiles of the fleet commanders as this information sank in. Years of military conditioning and cultural hatred were crumbling as the leaders realized that they no longer had any reason to fight. "This isn't war," whispered General Mordak. This is how humans end wars," Admiral Jackson replied. "We don't defeat armies. We eliminate the reasons for fighting. We don't conquer territories. We help people build better ways of living together." One by one, ships began to break away from the combined fleet. Not to attack, but to return home to worlds that were already celebrating peace. The Great War was ending not with a battle, but with the quiet recognition that there was nothing left to fight about. 6 months later, Ambassador Chen stood once again in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. But everything had changed. Where once there had been separate sections for the Hegemony Coalition and the Korthak Empire, now there was a single delegation representing the United Border Colonies. The new government's flag combined symbols from both former empires, and their representatives sat together peacefully. The crystal dome above still showed the same endless stars, but the atmosphere in the hall felt completely different. There was no tension, no barely controlled hostility between old enemies. Instead, there was something that the Galactic Council had rarely seen: hope. Council Speaker Norvak called the session to order. "We are gathered today to hear the final report on the human intervention in the Hegemony Korthak conflict. Ambassador Chen, the floor is yours." Chen walked to the central platform, still wearing the same simple black uniform she had worn 6 months ago. She looked just as ordinary as before, but now everyone in the hall understood that ordinary appearances could hide extraordinary capabilities. "Honored council members," she began, "I am pleased to report that the border conflict has been permanently resolved. The United Border Colonies have established a stable democratic government, implemented shared resource management programs, and achieved complete military integration between former enemy forces." "But how?" asked Ambassador Kethmar of the Trade Federation. 200 years of war don't simply end because people vote for peace." Chen smiled slightly. "You're right that voting alone wouldn't have been enough. The real work began after the military operations ended. We helped establish new economic systems that removed the artificial scarcity that caused the original resource conflicts. We provided technology and training to help former military personnel transition to civilian reconstruction work. And we facilitated truth and reconciliation processes that allowed both societies to understand how they had been manipulated." In the gallery above the main floor, former General Mordak sat next to former Admiral Korthva. Both of them now wore civilian clothes and worked for the border colony's new Department of Infrastructure Development. Their job was to use their military logistics expertise to coordinate peaceful construction projects instead of destructive military campaigns. The process wasn't instant, Chen continued. It took months of careful work to help both societies understand the real causes of their conflict and develop better ways of solving problems together. Elder Vashti raised one wrinkled hand. Ambassador Chen, may I ask you a personal question? Of course. Elder, when you first agreed to provide military assistance, did you already know how this would end? Chen was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. We knew that both empires were trapped in a cycle of artificial conflict, created by a small group of war profiteers. We knew that the ordinary people on both sides wanted peace, but didn't believe it was possible. We knew that with the right information and the right opportunities, they would choose cooperation over conflict. So you manipulated them into making peace? No, Chen replied firmly. We gave them accurate information and real choices. The decisions they made were entirely their own. Ambassador Zethkri stood up from his seat in the United Colonies delegation. He looked older and more tired than he had 6 months ago, but also somehow more at peace. If I may speak, Honorable Council? Speaker Norvak nodded. The floor recognizes former Commander Zethkri. I want to tell you what the humans actually did, Zethkri said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. They didn't conquer us. They didn't destroy us. They showed us who we really were. He paused, collecting his thoughts. For 2 centuries, my people believed that the Korthaks were our natural enemies. We were told that they were fundamentally different from us, that they wanted to destroy everything we valued. The humans proved that this was a lie. They showed us recordings of Korthak parents playing with their children, Korthak artists creating beautiful works, Korthak scientists working to cure diseases. They showed us that we had been fighting people who were just like us, for reasons that benefited neither of our peoples. From the gallery, former General Mordak stood up. The humans also showed us something else, he said. They showed us what we could accomplish if we worked together, instead of against each other. He gestured toward the large display screen at the front of the hall. May I? Chen nodded. And Mordak activated a holographic presentation. The display showed the border regions that had once been battlegrounds, but instead of destroyed worlds and military installations, the images showed thriving mining operations, research stations, and civilian settlements. The rare mineral deposits that we fought over for 200 years now provide resources for both of our peoples, Mordak explained. But more importantly, working together we've discovered new applications for these materials that neither empire had developed alone. Our joint research teams have created medical technologies that have eliminated 3 major diseases and energy systems that provide clean power for our entire region. The war cost us millions of lives and trillions of credits over 2 centuries, added Zethkri. 6 months of cooperation has given us more benefits than we gained from 200 years of fighting. Elder Vashti looked directly at Chen. And what did humanity gain from all this effort? Peace, Chen replied simply. A stable region where our trade ships can travel safely. New friends who share our values of cooperation and problem-solving. And the knowledge that our galaxy is a little bit better than it was before. But you must want something more than that, insisted Ambassador Kethmar. Some species would have demanded territory, or tribute, or submission. Chen shook her head. Honored Ambassador, humanity learned long ago that conquest creates more problems than it solves. We prefer to help our neighbors become prosperous and peaceful, because that makes the entire galaxy safer and more prosperous for everyone. Council Speaker Norvak leaned forward in his chair. Ambassador Chen, there are other conflicts in our galaxy. Border disputes, resource wars, territorial claims. Would humanity be willing to provide similar assistance to other regions? Chen exchanged a look with Admiral Jackson, who was sitting quietly in the human delegation. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod. If formally requested by the Galactic Council, Chen said, humanity would be willing to help mediate other conflicts, but with certain conditions. What conditions? First, all parties to the conflict must genuinely want to find peaceful solutions. We cannot force peace on people who are determined to keep fighting. Second, all parties must agree to complete transparency during the mediation process. Hidden agendas and secret deals are usually the reason why conflicts continue. And third, all parties must be willing to address the real causes of their conflicts, not just the surface symptoms. Those seem like reasonable conditions, said Speaker Norvak. Are there any other requirements? Chen's expression became more serious. There is one more thing the Council should understand. When humanity gets involved in ending a war, we don't just stop the fighting. We help rebuild the entire system that allowed the war to happen. This means major changes to governments, economies, and social structures. Not everyone is comfortable with that level of change. What kind of changes? Asked Ambassador Kethmar. The kind that ensure the war never happens again? Chen replied. New governmental systems based on transparency and accountability. Economic structures that don't allow small groups to profit from conflict. Social systems that help different groups understand each other instead of fear each other. In other words, said Elder Vashti, with what might have been amusement in her ancient eyes, you perform surgery on entire civilizations. Only when the patient requests it, Chen said, and only when the patient is willing to do the hard work of recovery. The hall was quiet for a long moment as delegates considered what they had heard. Finally, Speaker Norvak spoke again. The Council will consider these matters. But for now, let me ask one final question. The old warnings about humanity said that you don't fight to win battles, but to end wars permanently. Is that accurate? Chen thought about this for a moment. Not quite accurate, Honorable Speaker. We don't fight to end wars. We work to prevent them from being necessary in the first place. She gestured toward the United Border Colonies delegation, where former enemies now sat as colleagues and friends. The best victory is the one where nobody has to lose. As the council session ended, Admiral Jackson joined Chen at the platform. The sensor arrays have detected 17 other brewing conflicts across the galaxy, he said quietly. Chen nodded. Orders from command? We're to begin peaceful observation and analysis of the most critical situations. Just in case anyone decides they need our help. They walked together toward the exit, followed by the rest of the human delegation. Behind them, the voices of other council members could be heard discussing the implications of what they had witnessed. Do you think they'll ask for help with the other conflicts? Jackson asked. Chen smiled. Admiral, we just proved that 200-year-old wars can be ended in 6 months without firing a shot. What do you think? As the human delegation left the hall, Elder Vashti watched them go with thoughtful eyes. The old warnings had been right, but they hadn't gone far enough. Humanity didn't just end wars in unexpected ways. They made war itself obsolete. She made a mental note to update the archives. Future generations would need to understand not just what humans could do, but what they were willing to do to build a better galaxy for everyone. The stars outside the crystal dome looked the same as always, but somehow the future they illuminated seemed brighter.